am not going to accept a broken government without the check and balance of power that the framers of our Constitution put in there to protect against tyranny and oppression. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having me out. My name's John Gentry. I'm a candidate for governor for the state of Tennessee. My work is about taking down rampant corruption in government and putting the voice of the people directly in government, and I mean that very literally. We're going to talk a lot about that tonight. I was a Force Recon Marine for more than 8 years. I used to jump out of airplanes from 25,000 feet, full combat equipment. I've locked out of the escape trunk of fast attack nuclear submarines while they're underway. And I have served in every climate on this entire planet. Desert, north of the Arctic Circle, and nothing that I did in the military has been as arduous and difficult as my stand against corruption in government. And what I found in this fight is it comes down to two problems. Our form of government has been unlawfully altered, with judges holding expressly prohibited offices. And that doesn't mean a lot to a lot of us. We don't understand that. I'm going to talk a little bit about it. But the biggest problem is that we don't know what our constitutional rights are under the Tennessee Constitution. A little story, a little background about this. I was arguing in court, and I had exercised a right of the citizens that has not been exercised by any citizen in Tennessee since the year 1850. It's been 170 years since anybody exercised the right of remonstrance to be heard as a citizen on the floor of our legislative houses. It's our most powerful constitutional right. So to defend that right, I was arguing in court. And in the Tennessee Constitution, it's Article 1, Section 23, and it says that citizens have a right to peaceably assemble for their common good, to instruct our representatives. We have a constitutional right to give instructions to our senators and our representatives. Constitutional right to do that. And to apply to those invested with the powers of government. So who's invested with the powers of government? Governor Lee, senators, the Senate and the House, county commissioners, judges. The framers of our Constitution were intentionally broad, and they said those invested with the powers of government. The North Carolina Constitution, and we came from North Carolina, the North Carolina Constitution just says redress a grievance to the General Assembly. So our Constitution says to apply to those invested with the powers of government for redress of grievance or other proper purposes by address or remonstrance. I didn't know that it said by address or remonstrance. And so what that means, so you can apply to any power of government, and you can do it by oral address, or you can do it by a written remonstrance. And a remonstrance is just an old word that goes back to before the 12th century, I think, and it's a formal protest against government. That's what a remonstrance is a formal written protest against government. So I was arguing in court because I was looking at the Tennessee Constitution on our General Assembly website, and it says by address of remonstrance, and that's wrong. It's by address or, but if you Google the Tennessee Constitution, you'll find it. The General Assembly website is the first link you're going to get. And that's what everybody clicks on. It's a massive constructive fraud on our entire citizenry, this false version. And so I was arguing in court, believing that it was by address of. And I said, okay, well, let's go to grammar school here, Your Honor. And I said, of is a preposition. And by address of remonstrance is a prepositional phrase. And you can say, librarians are fond of books, and that has meaning. But you can't say librarians are fond, right? It doesn't make sense. Fond of what? So when a prepositional phrase is complementary like that, it's required to give meaning. So I was saying, by address of remonstrance, they have to address my remonstrance that I gave to the General Assembly. You have to tell me yes or tell me no, but you can't ignore me. You have to decide. And so this little snarky, corrupt Deputy Attorney General Janet Kleinfelter gets up and she says, well, the Constitution actually says by address or remonstrance. So I'm like, oh, I want to rebut that, Your Honor. I'm like on the edge of my seat, right? So it's my turn. And I was like, well, that's just great, Your Honor. Now I know I have been deceived by my government in a constructive fraud to not know that I have a right to address my senators and representatives. I said, I want to see the original Constitution. I want to see the original one with my own eyes. So I went down to the Tennessee Archives Library and I spoke with the Chief Legislative Librarian, Vincent McGrath, and I said, I want to see the 1834 Constitution and I want to see the 1870 Constitution. The original document, I want to see it. And he's like, well, that's kept in cold vault storage and you can look at the digitized version online. I said, no, I have a lawsuit against the speakers and clerks of both the House and the Senate, and I want to see the originals. So it went all the way up to the Secretary of State, and they're like, let Gentry see them. And this was the most profound, honorable experience I ever had in my entire life. They took the curator from the Archives Library, sent me an email, and he laid down some rules. You can't touch it, can't have any sharp objects around it, and some other things. And he said, if you agree to this, we'll have this ready for you in about a week. And they have to raise the temperature of the vault very slowly over about a week to get it up to room temperature, and then they brought it to a viewing room. And I literally read, it's written in script, and they don't teach our children script anymore in public schools. Maybe because they don't want us to be able to read our founding documents. I don't know.
Yep. Hello.
But I read script very well, and it's beautiful. It's beautifully written. I mean, it's perfect height and structure of the hand script. It's beautiful calligraphy work on there. So I verified the actual. It's in both the 1834 and the 1870 Constitution. It actually goes back to our first 1796 Constitution by address or remonstrance. So I added a cause of action to my lawsuit and said, now I'm suing the speakers and clerks to correct the false version of the Constitution on the General Assembly website. And the court dismissed my case. And they said, well, the General Assembly doesn't have a duty to have the Constitution on their website. They don't have to have it on there. And so this court doesn't have the power to order them to correct it. And my argument was, well, they all swore an oath to uphold the Constitution, did they not? And putting out a false version, and this literally strips us of a right to address government. We're going to talk more about this, but they call it a typo, and they said it happened in 1982. And so I appealed. I went to the Tennessee Court of Appeals, and they upheld the lower court opinion and said, well, they don't have a duty. They said, however, we encourage the General Assembly. You can go look this up on the court website. I mean, I'm not making this stuff up. They literally, and I've been fighting these guys for 3 years. The last interaction I had on this was about a month ago with Representative Johnny Garrett in my district. And I went to a meeting just like this, and I was like, Johnny Garrett, it's been 3 years. Will you please help me? Can you help me correct this false version of the Constitution? And he said, it's wrong. He said, I don't like that it's wrong, and I'm gonna talk to him. So I emailed him a couple weeks later, and what they're going to do now is they're just going to take it off the General Assembly website. They're not going to correct it. And they're waiting until, does anybody know there's going to be 4 amendments to the Tennessee Constitution on the ballot in November? Very few people are aware of that. And this is a big problem. But they're going to wait until if these amendments pass, and then they're going to take the Constitution off the General Assembly website, and probably the only place you can find it is if you go to Tennessee Code Annotated, which is that's a compilation of our statutory law. So why am I telling you this story? Why is this so important? That Constitution it establishes our form of government, and it protects the people against the government that the people created. That's all it is. It's not a contract, it's a compact where the people said, okay, we want to make sure that we have safety, happiness, and peace, and so we're going to create this form of government. So let's talk about, what is this form of government? We all know judicial branch, legislative branch, 2 houses, executive branch, governor. We all know that, right? There's many other aspects to our form of government. For example, our Constitution prohibits judges from having any other office. You're a judge, that's all you can get to be. Why do you think the founders did that? Because they know judges are always easily corrupted. And they knew you give a judge another office, it's always going to come to corruption. And we're going to talk some more about that too. In Article 1, Section 1 of the Tennessee Constitution, power is inherent in the people. Power is inherent in the people. And government is instituted for our peace, safety, and happiness. And to that end, the people have an unalienable right. Unalienable means you can't sell it. You can't transfer that right. It is inherent in the people that you have an unalienable. And then it says indefeasible. Indefeasible means this right cannot be violated at any time. We, the people of the state of Tennessee, have an unalienable, indefeasible right to reform government. We have a constitutional right to reform government out there. In Article 1, Section 31, it lays out the boundaries of the state. And, it talks about from this mountaintop to this river, and it's very long. It's over half a page, single-spaced. But at the end of it, it says, over this land, the people have the right of soil, and they have the right to exercise sovereignty. That's profound. The right of sovereignty. Do you know what that means? That means we are the ruler. We are not ruled by men, and especially not these corrupt politicians down in our General Assembly, down in the Capitol. We are not ruled by them. We rule ourselves. We have the power to exercise sovereignty. Literally, that means the people can make law. Literally, that's what that means. That's what the right of sovereignty is, the power to make law ourselves. Now, we look at this. Okay, so we have a right to exercise sovereignty. We have power inherent in the people and an unalienable, indefeasible right to reform government. It says alter, reform, or abolish government, actually. I don't want to abolish government. We need government, but I definitely want to reform. We need a lot of reforms. So how do we do that? And many people think, well, that means we're back to like 1776. We need to take up arms and take out government. No, that's not what they mean. They laid out a peaceful process for this. And it's in Article 1, Section 23. That citizens have a right to assemble together for their common good. And we're exercising the right of assembly right now. This is what the founders talked about. This assembly of citizens, this is the right of assembly. The right of assembly is not protesting out on the streets and burning buildings and throwing rocks through windows. That's violence. And that's a form of insurrection. What we're doing right now, just coming together, talking about problems, talking about solution. This is the right of assembly that we're exercising right now. So we have a right to peaceably assemble together for our common good, to instruct our representatives, and to apply to those invested with the powers of government for redress of grievance or other proper purposes by address or remonstrance. So I had some grievances with our corrupt judiciary, And so I remonstrated to the General Assembly at the time, not knowing I had a right to address them. And they announced my petition on the House floor. And it was just 39 seconds was all. And it was presented to the clerk of the House by Representative Bud Halsey, who's out of District 2. And it said, Mr. Speaker, I'm approaching the chief clerk on behalf of Mr. John Gentry involving a petition of grievances. 1, unconstitutional and void statutes. 2, failure to address grievances. 3, judicial reform. And 4, reinstitution of constitutionally guaranteed rights. That was read on the floor of the House because I exercised a constitutional right for the first time since the year 1870. And after that was announced, for about 10 seconds, you could literally hear a pin drop. 98 members in the House were stunned silent. And they were like, what was that? What just happened? And they were approaching Halsey. Bud Halsey called me up afterwards. He was out in the foyer and he said, man, the other members are asking me what's going on? What happened? What was that? And I'll tell you what that was. That was the voice and power inherent in the people waking for the first time in more than 150 years. That's what that was. And so what my work now is about is to teach all of you together how to exercise that right and get things done ourselves, because we're never going to get it done through our corrupt government. You toss a coin. Heads they win, tails we lose. It's a sucker's game. Literally, no matter who we elect, everything continues to worsen in this country. More taxation, more oppressing our rights with unlawful mandates in violation of our state constitution, further infringements and oppression of constitutionally protected rights. It gets worse and worse. Unhinged spending that's going on in our government, wasting our tax dollars for their corrupt purpose. It just gets worse and worse. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you guys how to fix this and put this into practical application. So as part of my candidacy, even if I'm not elected, when I can reach enough people with this, I'm going to get this done whether I'm governor or not. But I'll tell you what, you put me in office, I'm going to fast track this, and it's going to happen very quickly. I guarantee term limits. I guarantee term limits. When we have our we look at like congressmen, they say, oh, I'm going to fight for term limits, right? And it's one person, maybe a couple of them, gets killed in committee, never goes anywhere, right? Why would they want to limit their own power? Bill Lee, he had 10 for Tennessee. One of those was he was going to advocate for term limits. Have we heard a peep? Has anybody heard a peep out of Bill Lee on term limits? I haven't. I haven't heard a thing out of him. I guarantee it. Here's how I'm going to do it. We have a right to reform government. We have a right to exercise sovereignty, and we have a right to apply to those invested for redress or proper purpose. Term limits is a very proper purpose. So we're going to exercise these rights together. So what I'm going to do is what I'm doing right now, and I'm going to write up a remonstrance that's going to be presented by address to the General Assembly. Now, as governor, the governor has the power to convene the General Assembly. It's in the Tennessee Constitution. Bill Lee just exercised that power recently around the federal mandate for vaccinations, which they screwed up like they do most everything else. But we know the governor has the power to convene the General Assembly, so I'm going to convene them. All senators, all the representatives, y'all get down to the Capitol. We have some instructions from the people that we're going to present to you. And I'm going to go out on social media, and I'm going to have talks like this. I'm going to do press releases. if I have to mail every citizen in the state, but eventually, and especially when I explain why we need term limits, everybody is going to co-sign this remonstrance with me. I believe that I'm going to get 95% of the people are going to sign this with me. The United States Senate did a poll, and they did a study on term limits. 82% of the people in this country want term limits. Doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter your race, gender, regardless of your demographic, 82% of the people in this country want term limits. 82% is pretty much the sovereign will of the people. And let me take you back in history. This was August 15th, I think, I don't remember exactly the year. It was the first Congress. And they were talking about putting the right to instruct in our federal Constitution. Like, that was going to be right up there in the First Amendment, that we would have the right to instruct our representatives. They talked about it a whole day. And they were asking questions. What does this mean? Do we have to obey the instructions? What if the instructions conflict with the Constitution? And then how does this leave us if we've sworn to uphold the Constitution, but we're presented with instructions that we have to obey? And what they came out with is that, no, they don't have to obey the instructions, but they have to hear the instructions and consider and decide whether or not to obey according to their conscience and the confines of the Constitution. That's what they talked about. But here's an important part of that discussion that they had on August 15th, I think it was 1797. It was Representative Jerry out of South Carolina, and he said, "Do gentlemen not do gentlemen not conceive where the instructions may be so general as to come from all the people? If they do, it is the sovereign will. For gentlemen will not contend that sovereignty vests in the legislature. The friends and patrons of this Constitution have always held that sovereignty vests in the people, and they don't part with that on any occasion." So when we're listening to that, he's saying this right to instruct, if the instructions come from everybody, that's the sovereign will. And does that not make sense to you? That if we all want the same thing, if we all want term limits, it is the sovereign will of the people, right? So we're going to exercise our sovereignty. And I'm going to get 95% of the people in the state of Tennessee to sign a remonstrance with me. I'm going to convene the General Assembly, and I'm going to present our instructions from the people and say, we are not asking you, we are instructing you. We're asserting our right to reform government. We're asserting our right of sovereignty, and we're asserting our right to instruct you. And for any of you members who are tempted to vote no, I'm going to have one of the other members in here is going to call for a roll call, so we know exactly who votes yes and who votes no. And I'll be filing articles of impeachment for your failure to support the Constitution of this state, that the people have the right of sovereignty. We're not going to take no for an answer. Now, have you ever heard anyone running for office talk about using the Constitution the way it was intended? No. Have you ever heard anyone talk about asserting the sovereign will of the people? No. I'm not here with empty campaign promises. I'm here to restore the republic and the power that is inherent in the people. That's what my work is about, is putting your voice back into government. Now, we all have concerns about election integrity, do we not? So the solution to that, and the only solution, is you have to have an auditable election. If you cannot audit the results, you can't validate it, and you cannot audit ones and zeros on an electronic disk.
That's right.
You can't audit that. So we have to go back to paper ballots. Yes. And some controls around that. Now, our corrupt senators and representatives, they don't want this.
No.
I can tell you for sure we have some problems in our election system the way it is now. Just this last primary, people were complaining to me that systems were down. They weren't able to vote and they couldn't come back, so they didn't get to vote in the primary. And there were some other issues. Poll workers just saying nonsense, like if you vote in the primary, you can't come back in the general election. Just stupid stuff like that I'm hearing out there. But our representatives and senators, they don't want election integrity, apparently. They're putting on this broken system that we can't audit. We're going to use the same process. I'm going to go out and explain to the people why we need paper ballots. And when I explain, I'm not going to go into it right now, but when I explain the whole process of how paper ballots are going to work, it's going to be 100% secure. Can't cheat. It will literally be impossible to cheat with the controls that we put in place on this. So we're going to do the same thing for election integrity. We're going to assert the sovereign will of the people. And I can't imagine that the people are going to say, well, we want to stick with Dominion machines. I can't imagine that the people will want to do that. So what I'm here is I'm teaching you, the Tennessee Constitution, rights that have not been exercised in more than 170 years. And I want, these children, I want the people out there watching this, teach your children. They're going to be the future guardians of liberty. And because we weren't taught, we have been incapable of defending our own liberty because we haven't known what our rights are. And we have given up. Half the people out there don't even vote because they don't think it matters anymore. It's a big problem that we've given up, that everybody just feels absolutely helpless that we can have no voice. I'm one voice, and when I exercise the right of remonstrance as a result of that 39 seconds, more than a dozen corrupt judges were removed from the Tennessee Board of Judicial Conduct, and that agency was reconstituted from all judges to 4 judges, 8 judges, 4 attorneys, and 6 citizens. One citizen standing up, asserting his right, protesting a corrupt judiciary. I don't think anyone has ever accomplished. Talk about drain the swamp. Yeah. That is how we drain the swamp. This right of petition, the right to address or remonstrate to our General Assembly, corruption cannot stand in the face of this right because it is very public in their face. When you remonstrate against corrupt officials and you do it on the House floor and you say this judge is corrupt, Judge Davenport incarcerating children who haven't even done anything wrong. She's been doing it for more than 10 years. We got Judge Woodrow Adams indicted on 3 counts of child rape. And are these people impeached? No. We got our own Secretary of State today, Trey Hargan, caught drunk driving, swerving down the road, leaving a bar after he left a concert. That's a crime. And our senators and representatives, not a single one of them will propose articles of impeachment against our Secretary of State. They're above the law. In my administration, they're going to be held accountable because I am sick and tired of entrenched corruption in our government. So let's talk about, you hear this from me a lot, right? Corruption in government. What's corrupt? Let's talk about it. Every year they propose 1,500 about bills, new pieces of legislation, 1,500. And they pass close to 1,000. Like 800-900 bills every year get passed. The fact alone of that much legislation is proof of the corruption in the legislation. Absolutely. And for Governor Lee and the last 5 governors, Not a single veto. Not a single. Well, I had Haslam, when they wanted to make the Bible the state book, he vetoed that. That's the only time that I'm aware of in the last 5 governors that a governor has exercised veto power. I'm going to wear my veto stamp out. And I'm going to go out to the people and say, here's why I am not signing this corrupt, pretended legislation. And I want you to call your senator and call your representative and say, do not ride Governor Gentry's veto. We don't want it. I understand what Governor Gentry is saying. It's garbage. Knock it off. The fact that I'm going to veto so much of their legislation, you imagine, 900 come to me, no, here's why, send it back, and they got to come back down 900 times to override my veto. I'm just going to wear them out. Going to stop it. So we have, this was a grievance in the Declaration of Independence, by the way, for giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation.
Right. So
this is exactly one of the, it's a declared act of tyranny.
Yes.
And one of the reasons that we declared independence from Great Britain, pretended legislation. That's what all,
exactly what
90% of that legislation down there is pretended legislation. We have the problem with the false version of the Constitution on the General Assembly website. That's corruption because it's oppressing a right to address government. We have speaker section. I exercised that right a second time. And this time I went around the state and got signatures from across the state. And I presented that to the Tennessee House of Representatives and said, we're exercising our right to orally address and present our petition to the House orally. It's in the Constitution, right? Have a right to apply to those invested with the powers of government for redress or proper purpose by address. A child can read that. 6th grader can understand that. We have a constitutional right to address them. So I exercise that right, and I'm asking them to resolve to welcome, hear, and decide petitions. Seems pretty reasonable. I want to talk to them about the history. So what good is this right? Why is this right so important? This right is the cornerstone of our constitutional system. Literally, it is the cornerstone of our constitutional system. Going back, governors, colonial governors were removed by citizens exercising this right. To the crown. The crown removed colonial governors when the colonials were exercising this right, saying this guy's an idiot or he's corrupt. Removed governors, this right did. The Stamp Act, there were more than 1 million signatures. And the Stamp Act was another reason that we declared independence. They gave us their paper that's watermarked special paper and said all your legal documents they have to be written on this special paper that's made in Great Britain, and you're going to pay some money for that. And we were like, that's ridiculous. That was what led up to why we declared independence was the Stamp Act. But that was overturned through the right of petition. They had an Anti-Insurrection Act that you can't talk bad about government, about the federal government. And that was overturned by the right of petition. This right goes back to the 12th century Magna Carta. That's where it came from, 12th century Magna Carta. It was stated by a Michigan Supreme Court justice. He said, for this right to be oppressed, the spirit of liberty must have wholly disappeared. And the people must have become so servile. Servile means eager to please. And so debased, removed from your foundation of freedom and liberty. The people must have become so servile and debased as to no longer deserve the privileges of free men. Now you think about that. We got an 1883 Michigan Supreme Court justice saying, if you let this right be oppressed, the spirit of liberty must be dead in you. And you don't deserve any privileges of a free man. That's what he's saying. If you let this right, this is why I'm fighting to restore this right. One, we're going to start getting the job done ourselves. Term limits, election integrity. But this is how we take down corrupt officials. The So that's another face of corruption, is the oppression of this right. So I exercised this right by address, and Speaker Sexton ignored my emails. He wouldn't respond to me. I'm saying, when am I going to address the House? He wouldn't respond to me, so I had to take him to court. I'm in court right now a second time, wasting my money, wasting my time defending the Constitution and the rights of the people. And all I'm asking is for our senators and representatives to welcome, hear, and decide petitions. So Speaker Sexton has evidenced himself corrupt in violation of an oath of office, not supporting the Constitution of this state, and he has evidenced he doesn't care to hear from the people. That's what he's saying. Speaker Sexton says, I don't care what the people have to say. I don't want to hear their petitions. I don't want to hear their grievances. I don't care. That's your Speaker of your House. Doesn't care about the people. Doesn't care. He doesn't care to hear from us. So that's another form of corruption that I'm talking about, is oppression of this right. Now here's the worst one. Our Tennessee Constitution says no judge shall hold any other office of trust or profit. That's our form of government. You're a judge, that's all. And they did it to stop corruption. Well, in 1958, they created the Tennessee Code Commission. And the Tennessee Code Commission puts together all the public acts of the General Assembly. All of our statutory law is compiled, edited, and annotated by the Code Commission. That Code Commission today has Chief Justice Rogers of the Tennessee Supreme Court and Justice Bivens are members of the Code Commission holding prohibited offices. 2 justices from your Tennessee Supreme Court acting in violation of the Constitution, holding prohibited offices in an unlawful alteration of our form of government. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, the statute says that the Code Commission can compile and edit, right? Well, we see what happens when they change one letter or to of, right? They strip us of a right. So they can change one letter and say, oh, well, we're just fixing that typo. But they change the meaning. They can change the meaning of the law. Now, another problem, and this is really the whole entire breakdown of whatever your dissatisfaction is. I don't care what it is. This is why judges holding prohibited offices, because you got legislators in there making law that's going to the judiciary, right? And the judiciary is now compiling it, and they can edit it. That Code Commission also has authority to propose substantive change to the public acts of the General Assembly. Our judiciary, 2 justices, can go to the legislature and say, we want you to change this substantially. This is that's making law. That's judicial power exercising legislative power. It's a violation of separation of powers doctrine. Now, here's the real problem. And more judges holding prohibited offices is the Tennessee Board of Judicial Conduct. They oversee the conduct of judges all across the state. Well, you got judges overseeing judges, attorneys in black robes, overseeing other attorneys in black robes, and you got the fox watching the hen house. And since that agency was created in 1971, they have never recommended removal or impeachment of a single judge. Not a single time. And we have rampant corruption in our judiciary. Everybody knows somebody that's gone through corrupt court proceedings. Doesn't matter what county that you're in. It is a statewide, nationwide problem. And the reason that we have this problem in our judiciary is because you got the fox watching the hen house. Now, this is also a usurpation of legislative power, because the Constitution, Article 5, Section 1, the House has the sole power of impeachment. And who can be impeached? Judges, attorneys for the state, governors, legislators. It lists them out in the Constitution in Article 5, Section 2. And in Article 6, Section 6, judges can be removed by concurrent vote of both houses. Both houses can remove a judge. Well, that sounds to me like judicial oversight is legislative power. Doesn't it sound the same to you? And so you got the legislature giving their power to the judiciary to oversee itself. And it ain't working too good. Not at all. Now, the other breakdown is this. So now you've got a corrupt judiciary without the check of one branch over the other. And whenever you have an unchecked branch of government, you always have tyranny. Always. Now, you've got a corrupt judiciary and you've got bad legislative law. Who do you go to challenge the legislative as being repugnant to the Constitution? You go to the judiciary, who's corrupt. And so now the legislative process has broken down because we have an unchecked judicial branch. No check and balance of power. What I'm going to do about it is when I'm elected governor, the first thing I'm going to do is call up Speaker McNally and Speaker Sexton, say, y'all are going to fix this. Like pronto. You're going to fix this, and you're going to abolish these agencies, and you're going to take back judicial oversight into the legislative houses where that power belongs. I'm going to ask them very nicely. I've already asked them nicely. I'm going to still ask them nicely because I'm that kind of guy. But when they say no again, I'm going to take a padlock and chain and put it on the Senate chamber and the House chamber, and I'm not going to allow them to legislate. The Tennessee Constitution, Article 3, Section 1, supreme executive power is vested in the governor. The Black's Law Dictionary definition of executive power is the power to bring the law into effect. Our supreme law is our Tennessee Constitution, and I am going to bring that law into effect. And I'm going to lock, I am going to lock the doors to the legislative houses until they come into compliance with the state constitution. Like, that's how far I'm going to take this. I am not going to accept a broken government without the check and balance of power that the framers of our Constitution put in there to protect against tyranny and oppression. So because we have these different forms of corruption, corrupt legislation going on down there, judges holding prohibited offices, this alteration of our form of government, then this comes back to the individual courthouses across this state, and people are suffering. And I'm telling you, man, it's bad. I mean, people are having their children stolen under color of law, with judges relying on false and unsupported allegations made by government agencies like DCS. Divorce court is a mess. It is emotionally and financially devastating for both parties. It is, our courts are a mess right now, and it's because we have all these corrupt judges. It was William Carroll, I think he was the 6th governor of Tennessee. He's probably my favorite governor of the state of Tennessee. He said the character, he's talking to the General Assembly, and he said the character of a state is so reflected in its judiciary that it requires your constant attention at all times. So he's saying to the General Assembly, the character of the state, is this a good government, bad government? The character of the state is so reflected in its judiciary, it requires your constant attention. And our legislative houses give zero attention to our judiciary. You call up your senator and representative and complain about a corrupt judge, he says, well, we'll go to the Tennessee Board of Judicial Conduct. Judges overseeing judges. And nothing. These judges are literally held above the law with this. And then this results in legislators like and state officials like Secretary Trey Haggard not being impeached, held above the law. I can guarantee you, his DUI is going to go away. Yep. He's going to get a slap on the wrist in there. He should have an ignition lock right now. I think that's what they do with the rest of the people, but not our high-ranking state officials. We've got Deputy Attorney General Kleinfelter, in my court case, I have a certified copy. She falsified evidence in a court of law. A Deputy Attorney General, Janet Kleinfelter, falsified evidence. Now, I'm on here live stream. I say this all the time. This is a corrupt Deputy Attorney General. Now, you would think they would come after me, libel or slander, right? They don't, because I'm right. And they know I can prove it. And they know I know my way around a courtroom. But we have got to be outraged as a people. We really do. You know, you should be outraged that this right of petition is oppressed. You should be outraged that our Constitution has been unlawfully altered, stripping us of a right. You know, if we don't stand up right now, you know, you guys have seen my 8-month-old son, right? That's why I'm fighting. That's why I'm doing this. More than 8 years as a Marine, I will not accept that the men and women that sacrificed to establish and preserve this republic did it in vain. I won't accept that. And so I'm standing up and fighting. I want you to stand with me. Right. You know, I'm doing this by the book, by the law, in the Constitution. I'm doing it peacefully and lawfully. This is the process that the founders laid down. And I'm just asking, come stand with me, come fight with me. And we will take down corruption in this state. Now, when we get this done here in Tennessee, we get term limits, we get election integrity, what do you think our neighbors are going to do? What do you think is going to happen in Kentucky and Georgia? They're going to follow our example. One of the things I'm going to do is, as governor, I'm going to have a petition and remonstrance day. Any citizen can come down to the Capitol on this day unannounced and orally address me and present their grievances or their proper purpose. Once a month. If I have to have it more because the line is too big, I'll do it 2, 3, 4 days a month. I want to hear from the people of this state. Now, when Governor Gentry has a petition and remonstrance day, what do you think is going to happen over in Arkansas, in Kentucky, and everywhere else? Why isn't our governor doing that? It's going to set an example. This work is literally going to change this entire country. By Tennessee, the volunteer state, leading the way, just as we did in the Mexican War, volunteering down there, we're going to step up ourselves as American patriots, God-loving, God-fearing American patriots, leading and setting an example for the entire country. I can't, you know, one man, I can't do this work. The reason that I'm so effective down in the General Assembly right now is because every person that learns about my work, they understand it. They know what I'm talking about, and they stand with me. And government sees this. This is what I'm about, is bringing us together. I mean, really uniting the people of this country in common purpose, regardless of your political affiliation. I'm going to bring us back together. And you guys out there are going to help me do it. And I don't, you know, this campaign for governor, I'll get it done fast. All of these things, if I'm elected, they're going to happen anyway. I use this campaign as a way to teach you, as a platform to get out to all the people around the state of Tennessee and educate you. And eventually, we're going to have enough informed citizens, we're going to start getting this work done anyway. This is a labor of love for me. It's a duty. You know, I have no desire, really. I have no desire for office. I do this out of a sense of duty, that I'm capable. I know how to get this work done. I know how to run and administer government. I was a CPA for more than 20 years. And my expertise as an accountant is forensic accounting. Man, I am like a coon dog, sniffing out fraud, waste, and abuse. I'm really good at it. And that's another skill that I will apply, is going through, 600-800 page state budget line by line. Was this? I'm going to audit the heck out of these guys. So that's what my work is about, is restoring the voice of the people, taking down corruption by restoring our form of government. The administration side of the government and all of the other issues that are out there, whatever your concern is, literally everything gets solved when we restore this right and restore our form of government. We can't do anything else until we first have a voice and the form of government that was established in our state constitution. So that's where, I peel all this back and I've gotten down to what is the root cause of this. And the root cause is the people have forgotten the Constitution. You've forgotten your roots, and government is acting in violation of the Constitution. We get these fundamental problems fixed. Everything else is going to fix itself. So thank you guys for taking time. If anybody has any questions, I welcome them. I'm, by the way, completely deaf on this side, 30% deaf on this side, so you're going to have to speak up really loud if you have any questions.
Seems like what you're presenting is the solution actually preceded the corruption. So the solution, usually when you have a problem, the solution comes up, meaning we got to come figure some way to fix this out. The solution has always been, which is when we go back to the original way, so the solution has always been there.
Yeah, more a statement than a question, but he's saying that usually the solution comes after the problem. But in this case, the solution has been there all of the time. It's always been there. This right of petition, going back to medieval England, the right of petition, this right of remonstrance, it took the place of prolonged discontent. We have a lot of discontent now, don't we?
Yes,
this right took the place of prolonged discontent and the presentation of a long list of grievances at the point of a sword. This right took the place of violence against authority. Took the place of that. What happened, some history on this, at the time of the Civil War, Congress and the state governments were overwhelmed with petitions for and against slavery. They were overwhelmed with them. And I don't know what happened here in Tennessee. I haven't found anything, but in the United States Congress, and I think it was probably the same, but in the United States Congress, they said, well, there's so many petitions, we're just not going to hear anymore. We can't deal with it. It's too much. And it was 5 years later, John Quincy Adams argued that this right it's in the First Amendment, that the people have a right to petition. You can't take that away. It's the cornerstone of our system. He said you have to hear petitions. So they put it back in the United States Congress. But we were decimated here in Tennessee. I mean, Union soldiers came in here, moved into mansions and farmlands, or antebellum, I don't think really had any mansions. But they moved into the big houses here, and they cleared the land of all hardwoods. They killed all the stock to feed themselves. We were decimated here in Tennessee after the Civil War. We're just trying to call back and survive after that. There wasn't any need to petition. I mean, we literally, the only possessions that Tennesseans had after the Civil War was the land, because pretty much everything else was destroyed. So we didn't really have any need to petition government. And then we got into the Roaring 20s, mass consumerism, everybody's partying, having a good time. And then the Great Depression, and we forgot. We just forgot. And government is glad that we forgot, because they don't want to hear from us. They want to go about their corrupt business. And so government, including in our education system, they don't teach about this right. Now, if anybody is skeptical about this, you can go watch the video of the announcement of my remonstrance on the House floor. It's documented in the House journals. You can look at it on my website. You can read the Constitution. We have a right to apply to those invested with the powers of government by address or remonstrance. Power is inherent in the people. Sovereignty is vested in the people. It's in our Constitution. This is where we need to go to start fixing these things. We need to start doing it ourselves and stepping up. I'm just here to facilitate this process for you, to be your advocate in government to get things like term limits and election integrity, and then come down to me on petition and remonstrance day. Tell me what else you want, and we'll start getting this done as a people. If everybody wants it, I don't know. Maybe we want to make it mandatory to have the Pledge of Allegiance back in our schools.
Right, and prayer.
So let's put that out to the people and see if everybody wants that. And then we'll present our instructions in the same way. Whatever your concerns, your grievances, whatever your proper purpose, suggestions, we should always be able to bring these to government all along. But the only people they want to hear from is who's ever making campaign contributions or slipping them money under the table. Yes, sir.
Can you explain to us the 4 amendments that are on the ballot?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that question. So the question was, there are going to be 4 proposed amendments to the Tennessee Constitution that are going to be on the November ballot. Now, first of all, Article 11, Section 3 of the Tennessee Constitution defines the process for how amendments are made to the Constitution. And how that works now is a General Assembly proposes an amendment to the Constitution. That's the first step. Has to pass. And we're talking about like 2 legislative sessions. So every 2 years we elect House representatives, right? Every 2 years House seats go up, right? So that's the like 111th General Assembly before. We're in the 112th General Assembly right now. So these amendments had to get passed in the 111th General Assembly. Then we come to the next 2-year election. Now, 6 months prior to the election of the 112th General Assembly, they're supposed to be published. And the definition, Black's Law Dictionary definition of published, is to make known to the people in general. And the people in general do not know. I mean, this is a pretty informed group here, but most of the people in Tennessee, they have no idea that they're going to be voting to amend the Tennessee Constitution. I went back and read 400-page House Journal from the 1870 Constitutional Convention. I read through the whole thing. And what they did, they wanted to advertise the new 1870 Constitution. They wanted to put it in 2 newspapers in every major city and 1 newspaper in every county. And they lost vote on that by, I think it was like 3%. Like they were very divided. Are we going to spend money and advertise this in the newspapers? Man, that's publishing the Constitution, right? Especially back at that time in 1870. What they decided on was that they first said, well, look, we want to print 30,000 copies. They said it's not enough. Then they came back, somebody else moved for 30,000. And then I think they ended up with 75,000. So they published, like in book form, 75,000 copies of the Tennessee Constitution. And they gave it to the delegates. And then the delegates took it back to their constituents. And then the next gubernatorial election, the people voted to ratify the 1870 Constitution. Now, so that's 1870. In 1796, we only had 60,000 people. 1796, so we're talking, what, 60 years? I can't imagine there wasn't a couple 100,000 people in the state at the time. I would probably the census is out there. I'm sure it wasn't 300,000 people, maybe somewhere around there. But they printed 75,000 copies. That's pretty much a copy for every household, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what they did, and they gave it to the delegates, and the delegates took it back, and then the people voted on it. And here we got these slick little guys down in the General Assembly. And they say, well, we put it on the Secretary of State website and it's on the General Assembly website, these amendments. I'll tell you what, if you can go find it on the General Assembly website You get kudos from me because it's hard. It is really hard to find these amendments on the General Assembly website. Average citizen will never find them on there. On the Secretary of State website, when I first found out about these, the URL was like business services dash charitable contributions dash gaming dash this dash that, nothing proposed amendments. Like they literally, the URL was a fake URL intentional to deceive Google algorithms, I think. Like they literally did not want this out. I still have a copy of that URL. Probably an earlier post on my Facebook page, it's on there. Because I started putting it out to the people, I'm like, well, looky here. These guys got a fake URL so nobody can find these things. After I started protesting about this, they put it on the front, they put a banner on the front page of the Secretary of State website, and that'll link you to them. And then other than that, you have to click elections, and then at the top of that, there's a little thin tan bar that has proposed amendments, and you got to navigate to it, to get in there. Now, what are the amendments? So there's 4. The first one is our Constitution prohibits ministers from having a seat in the General Assembly. The United States Supreme Court in 1978 declared that the Tennessee Constitution, that section, was unconstitutional. Jefferson and Madison didn't really understand why a person's chosen profession should preclude them from running for office and talking about ministers. So Jefferson and Madison didn't see a problem with it either. I don't either. I think they could use a lot of God down there, down in the General Assembly. I still think it's wrong because it hasn't been published properly. But that one, I would probably vote yes for myself. The other one, right to work, what they're putting this out, this is all tricky, corrupt attorney language that they're doing on these things. What they're putting out there, I think, is nobody should be forced to join a union. That's what they're saying, that you have a right to work. Well, here's a couple of problems about the right to work. Right? Who does that protect you from? It protects you from employers, doesn't it? What that pretended amendment says is no person or corporation can deny employment based on a person's membership in or not in a union. So what it sounds like to me is because it says you cannot be denied employment if you're in a union or not in a union. So if you're in a union, that sounds pro-union to me. That's what I think the hidden language. It's not hidden, but it's not easy to see unless you read it really carefully. But I think it's pro-union. And while the idea of unions is good, I mean, look at Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamsters. I mean, it's always corrupt. It's always corrupt. In today's world, unions are always ran by attorneys, and these attorneys go down and they lobby down in the General Assembly, or they hire a PAC to go lobby down in the General Assembly, and they start enacting laws that supposedly protect workers. But what it's about is it's a scam so that these attorneys can sue businesses. And they do these as class action lawsuits, and what the employees might get, they get some chump change, $500, $1,000. And I say chump change, that's a lot for some of us. But the attorney is getting 30% of, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 employees that are getting, the attorney's making millions.
Yes.
And these attorneys are exploiting the workers, I think, far, far worse than the businesses. Really, I do. That these attorneys that are suing, based on this labor-friendly legislation, they're just using them, man. So that's the right to work. Now the other problem is, so if it's saying you can't deny employment if you're in or not in a union, right? Well, that protects you from the employer, does it not? Isn't that what that's protecting you from? The employer. That they can't terminate you or deny you employment. It's protecting you from the employer. What's the purpose of our Constitution? It establishes our form of government and protects the people from the government. This right to work has no place in a Constitution. It should be statutory law. And they're trying to slip it into the Constitution because it'll be much harder to stop it. And I think it's a pro-union scam. The other one is disability of a governor. And this one, maybe they're afraid of me. I don't know. But this is Pelosi garbage, straight out of D.C. And what it is the cabinet, if the governor is unable to perform his duties, then the cabinet can remove him. And the Speaker of the House, corrupt Cameron Sexton, would become the governor. Now, when I was listening, there was Senator Becky Massey was talking on the House floor about this amendment, and she said, you know, if he's mentally disabled, or you know, if he gets hurt and can't perform his duty, then you know, this would keep government running, and we would have the Speaker, you know, become over there. Then, well, I'm like, wait a minute now. So if he's unable to perform his duty because of mental incapacity, and there's no language like, what, has he got to be diagnosed crazy? Does he got to be diagnosed psychotic? You know, what does that, you know, mentally incapable, what does that mean? And the cabinet, we have 22 agencies in Tennessee: Department of Education, Health, Human Services, Department of Children's Services, 22 of them. That's the cabinet. Plus there's 6 close cabinet members, like the press secretary and those guys. So 28 people. So you get 15 of them say, Gentry's crazy. He's unfit to perform his duty. I guess they could get rid of me. So our Constitution already provides for for passing the baton in case of the death of a governor. It has stood since 1870. Why do we need to change it now? It's been there more than 170 years. Why y'all fooling with it? So it's just more corruption, you know, more to protect themselves. The other one, this one is the dumbest thing in the world. This one really is. Amendment to prohibit slavery.
Okay.
It's this now. Okay, who doesn't want to prohibit slavery? Yeah, nobody wants slavery back. We're all against that. Nobody believes in that. Article 1, Section 33 already prohibits slavery. And I forget the other section, but it says, there shall be no right to property in men. We were required to do that under the Reconstruction Act, and that's why we have an 1870 Constitution, is because we had to prohibit slavery. That's why we have an 1870 Constitution. And Article 1, Section 33 says that slavery and involuntary servitude are forever prohibited except as punishment of a crime for which a person has been duly convicted. That's the language today. What they're changing it to is slavery and involuntary servitude are forever prohibited. Nothing shall prevent an inmate from working. Nothing shall prevent it. What do you mean? We said except as punishment for a crime that a person's been duly convicted, but now it's saying nothing shall prevent an inmate from working.
Sounds like let 'em
What's up there? That's tricky attorney language again, right?
let 'em go.
And this is why they don't want you to discern this stuff. So, 2 things in my mind. If there's nothing that will prevent an inmate from working, I guess our private prison system, Core Civic, can put prisoners to work. Because nothing is there to prevent an inmate from working, right? Well, that sounds like slavery to me. I don't know. The other and probably more likely scenario is they want prisoners to have jobs. And probably what will happen is maybe some of that will be used to be garnished from their wages and maybe used to offset the cost of their incarceration. But probably we're not going to get a rebate from Core Civic from that. The state's just going to keep that. They're going to keep that money. But most likely, a lot of prisoners have children, and those children are in foster care because they're prisoners. And so they will garnish the wages as child support from these guys. And the scam for that is when the state is collecting child support like that, then they go to the federal government and our Social Security fund through Title IV incentive. And this is why we have a problem in our Social Security fund, is because it's being depleted under the Clinton Safe Family Act to support the foster care and child support system through our courts. And the courts are taking a cut of all of this money, and it goes right back to corrupt judges, you know. And so that's like a whole nother topic. But this one to prohibit slavery is stupid. And Article 11, Section 16 of the Tennessee Constitution, it says, "The Declaration of Rights hereto prefixed shall forever be a part of this Constitution, and shall never be violated under any pretense, and to guard against transgressions, they are forever beyond the reach of government." Article 11 says it is forever beyond the reach of government, but here these guys are changing Article 1, making it okay for inmates to work. So thank you for asking that question. And so my suggestion, except for the one to allow ministers to serve in the General Assembly, I encourage you to vote no on those, on top of the fact that they are not properly presented for your consideration prior. You know, the reason they said this has to be published 6 months prior to the election of the Second General Assembly, why do you think they did that? It gives you time to vet them.
That's right. Yeah.
Hey, are you going to vote for or against that amendment? I want to know where you stand before I cast my vote for you. Because to those guys back then, changing the Constitution was a big deal. And that's why they made it so difficult.
That's right.
And our Constitution, I think it's only been amended like 7 times. California, 57 times.
Yeah, look at California.
Yeah.
So, but now they found a way to get around this process and not publish it to the people. And the people have become so weak and ignorant of our Constitution, we don't even know to defend the most sacred document in the state of Tennessee anymore. And so that's what I'm educating about. This is our sacred document, you know, to our freedom and our liberty. And we have to defend that Constitution and not allow these guys to amend it in violation of the process. So, any other questions?
Touch on 4 things real quick.
Yes, sir.
I haven't heard you talk about your faith, your view on marriage, right to life, or Second Amendment.
So give me those one at a time here.
Your faith.
My faith. I'm a Christian. I grew up as a Seventh-day Adventist. In my childhood, I went to parochial school all the way, I think, 2nd grade through high school. So I'm Christian. Much of our constitutional structure and the way that it's built is based on Christian principles.
What's your view on marriage?
Marriage is between, I agree with our state constitution, marriage is between a man and a woman.
Amen.
You know, now our Constitution also says you have a right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. And if you want to pursue happiness in a different way, I guess that's your right to do with it. Personally, you know, I don't agree with it, but people have a right to do that. But that doesn't mean that we have to make special interest legislation to facilitate that process. You know, legislation is to benefit all of the people. And when we start getting into special interest legislation, whatever it is, that causes division. And it tears our people, it pits our people against each other. You know, so I'm not for, although, you know, if you want to go and have a different kind of life as your pursuit of happiness, fine. But don't expect any special interest legislation to get my signature.
Your view on right to life.
So this is on the question is right to life, and so we're talking about abortion. in my personal view, life begins at conception.
Amen.
And I believe that abortion should be prohibited because the Constitution says that every person has a right to life. And so does that child. The problem that we have with this, I was just reading an article recently, I think it was down in Texas, and there was a woman where the child is not going to live. It's going to die either in wound or soon after birth, and it's also dangerous to the mother. But the way our corrupt legislators work, and they do this intentionally, they make the language intentionally vague. So and they do that so that judges in our corrupt courts can manipulate the law and decide whichever way they want to go, right? If they want to prosecute, they can. If they don't want to, they can justify it. And so in this case down in Texas, this doctor, where an abortion was probably proper because the child wasn't viable and it was going to hurt the mother, but the doctor wouldn't do it because he felt that he would get charged under this legislation because it's so vague, the legislation down there. I believe that there should be exceptions. That when an embryo is not viable and if the mother's life is put at risk or will cause harm to the health of the mother, I think it's okay. Also, instances like rape and things like that, I think, but the exception language needs to be clear. And I can tell you, anybody else, Lee, Martin, anybody else running for governor, they are not going to be able to read the legislation the way John Gentry does. As a forensic accountant, and dealing with corruption and the legislation, man, I can read through it in like 5 minutes. Like, oh, I see what they're doing here. They're being vague, they're being ambiguous. We will have clear exception language here in Tennessee, to protect women when they need that kind of protection. Now, another issue with this, people from all over the world follow my work, and I don't remember exactly, but there was an Australian person that warned us, and she said, be careful what you wish for if you want to get abortion. And she said, it started out in Australia, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, or something, and now they can do it like out of wound abortion.
They're trying to do that right now.
And it also leads to a lot of other corrupt angles, with what's happened in Canada and what this person said down in Australia. So, what I personally believe on this and how this should be decided, I am not about being ruled by men, by those senators and representatives. I think that we should rule ourselves. This is such a contentious issue with abortion. Are we going to go back and forth? So we get a Democrat in there and then abortion becomes legal? We get a Democrat trifecta government, now it's legal. And then Republicans take control and then it goes the other way and we're back and forth in this tug of war. And so what I suggest is that we go through this same process and express the sovereign will of the people and put out legislation and let the people decide. There was West Virginia, there was a delegate up there that proposed this same thing, and the governor of West Virginia said, no, this is not for the people to decide. Well, I guess he hadn't read his West Virginia Constitution, or it's not as well written and as protective of individual rights as our Tennessee Constitution, that we have the right to exercise sovereignty. Now, if we have the people decide whether or not, and for Tennessee, we had abortion, I think it was in the 2010 gubernatorial election, and what they amended to the Tennessee Constitution then was that nothing in this Constitution grants a right to abortion. And that passed, it was pretty close, I think it was about 7%, that passed, that the people of Tennessee affirmed that the Constitution does not grant the right to abortion. So I think if we put it to the people, I believe that the people will decide right and protect the life of the child in one. What's the next?
Amendment.
Second Amendment. We'll also look at Section 26 of the Tennessee Constitution, which says that citizens have a right to keep and bear arms for their common defense. Now, common defense, that's not home defense. Common defense means defense against enemies, foreign and domestic. That's what common defense is. So that protects, that's clear, that protects military-grade weapons. In our Tennessee Constitution, it becomes more clear with that. Do you see how I am fighting for the First Amendment right to petition? I fight just as hard for all rights, including the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. You know, not only, you know, may we need that at some time if things continue to get worse in this country, but it also, you know, protects us. Nobody's, you know, anybody tries to think about invading the United States, they're going to have a whole lot of angry Americans out there with rifles. So it becomes, you know, you look at what's happened with Russia invading Ukraine. You know, they have to pass out firearms to the civilians in Ukraine. Where they got them? You know, a lot of us already have them here. You know, that we don't have to do that. So I'm a staunch defender of all constitutional rights. I was just corresponding with an attorney with the Tennessee Firearms Association just a few days ago, and we both agree that there is gun legislation on the books right now that is void for vagueness. It's the same thing that we talk about with these abortion laws. These attorneys do this on all legislation, and they make it intentionally vague so judges can decide whichever way the wind blows. It's written, the law is written that way. And so we have some gun legislation that is void for vagueness that I would like to see repealed off of there. And our Tennessee Constitution says the legislature may regulate the wearing of arms with a view to prevent crime. So under our Tennessee Constitution, the only legislative authority to regulate arms is only the carrying of arms, and then only with a view to prevent crime. And when you apply that metric out of our Tennessee Constitution, it makes much of our legislation repugnant and void under our Tennessee Constitution. And we need to fix that. We need to get some of this bad gun legislation off the books and restore this constitutional carry that Lee put out. It is a scam. It's trickery. And it will deceive citizens into thinking they can carry when they can't. It is total sham legislation. It was just for him to look good. Look, I got you constitutional carry. He didn't get us anything. There's nothing that legislation does for us. It's more than pretended legislation. That it? Anybody else?
Just for your information, that case in Texas was my grandson and his wife. And they were forced to stay in the hospital for 2 weeks while they decided whether or not that baby was going to die.
This was literally your...
Yes, absolutely.
Wow.
I cried for days over that because I love them two kids. And they were put through hell because of some batch of lawyers couldn't decide whether or not to let her have an abortion. What they ended up doing was to initiate childbirth, labor. But the baby was dead inside the mother for over a week.
Well, there's a gentleman in the audience here where I was talking about that case where a doctor didn't want to perform abortion, and there happens to be a gentleman here who's that was his granddaughter or daughter?
It was my grandson and his wife.
Yeah, grandson and his wife are the actual ones in that. Well, that's quite a coincidence. So thank you for that.
It is. It's a small world. I wasn't expecting you to talk about that.
I wasn't expecting to talk about it too. I got the question on it.
It broke my heart. The girl's water broke at 19 weeks.
We need to protect mothers out there, but we also need to protect, the arbitrary abortion of life.
Lawyers.
Now, anybody else have a question? I think you had one.
I do. You talk about the people deciding, right, in terms of, now how do we determine if those people are legal people and they have that ability to do the decisions? Again, when we get into voting and things like that, and people say, well, there's no ID required and all these other things. And then when we also get into, if things are done on the internet, how do we assure from hacking and things like that? How do we make sure that the people are truly represented and they are Tennesseans?
Yeah, well, we've got, whether you're a resident of the state of Tennessee, their utility bills, there's a whole process that you go through when you're registering to vote, or even when you're getting a bank account. And I kind of like that same process that you provide with that. But I don't know that we're going to have too much like fake signatures going on there that we want this. When I did my last petition, what I did is I had the people put in their name and their address and their phone number and their email address, like their home address, their legal address. And if anybody wants to challenge that, let them challenge it. But I think if people are taking the time to put in their email address, their home address, and their phone number, I think the only thing, I made the email optional, but I required phone number and home address when I sent these out for signature. Anybody else?
Real quick, I'm going to back up the point just a little bit, but I assume because we're 5 weeks away from the election, run as an independent. Why not primary?
I can't, I'm hard of hearing, I can't hear you.
I assume because we're 5 weeks away from the election to run as an independent. Why not primary Lee in August?
Oh, so the question is, why am I running as an independent rather than participating in the primary against Governor Lee? Thank you for that question too. When I first ran for state senate for the 2020 election, I announced as a Republican. And then people favorable to me and to the work that I'm doing reached out and said, you're going to get disqualified off the Republican Party ticket. They're going to find a reason that you're not going to be allowed on there. And so I thought about that for a while, and I switched to independent. My work about taking down corruption in government, that corruption comes from our GOP party members as well, and they don't like me. They don't want me stopping the corruption that comes from both parties. So I expect that they're going to find a reason. Now, in this last primary, I think we had 2 or 3 primary candidates in opposition to Governor Lee. And the GOP disqualified them. And one of them, I'm friends with the guy, Curtis Carney, had him over at my house. We talk. Good guy. I think I'd do a better job as governor, but he's a good guy. And he's just as sincere as I am. And it looks to me like the party disqualified him in violation of their own GOP rules. So I don't trust the executive committee of the GOP to allow me the privilege of being on the Republican Party ticket. The last thing on that point, in Sumner County, my district, we had 3 candidates for county commission removed by the GOP running against incumbent Republicans. And they removed them from the primary race. One of them went on and became a write-in candidate and won as a write-in candidate. One defeated a Republican incumbent as a write-in candidate because they're working really hard in Sumner County trying to clean up their school board and their county commission. They're working really hard up there. Now, so they got rid, these were 3 good conservative Republicans that were removed from the party ticket against incumbent Republicans. And they were endorsed by the Sumner County Republican Party. At the same time, we had Deanne DeWitt running for House seat, and she was a formerly registered Democrat in Ohio. I think going back to like, it was 2018 or 2011, I don't remember exactly, but she was, I looked and did background checks, because I don't put out anything I can't validate and verify myself. So I checked, looked at Deanne DeWitt's address records, where she was at in Ohio. We looked at election registration. She was a registered Democrat in Ohio. And she's running as a Republican, and she wasn't challenged by the GOP. So how are you going to trust that little R in parentheses behind a name when you got a registered Democrat that's allowed, and then you got good conservative candidates removed from the ballot? And so I'm not playing that game. I'm going to be on the ballot. And eventually, when enough people know about my work, because everybody that knows about my work, that understands the magnitude of the power of the right of remonstrance, and they understand my sincerity taking down corruption, every single person stands with me. The only ones that don't stand with me are the corrupt, because they know I'm going to put an end to the gravy train going on. So that's why I ran as an independent. Now, as I've looked into this more, George Washington, in his farewell address, he said, I've warned about this before, but I want to give you the most solemn warning ever. You need to avoid party politics. You need to avoid parties. He said, he's telling in his farewell address, you need to avoid parties. He said the most horrid calamities occur when when the people divide into parties. And he said, so he's looking back at what's happened in Great Britain and in France. George Washington, he's looking about what happened across the pond. And he's saying, what we've seen from party division is false alarms. What does that sound like? False alarms. COVID? Yeah. Everybody's going to die, but hardly anybody does. Riots. George Floyd, January 6th insurrection. That's party division causing these things. And George Washington saw the same things happen because of party division. I wrote a post about this on my website page, and I hope you go take a look at it, talking about George Washington's farewell address and why he gave us a solemn warning against party affiliation. And so I think now, learning more from our founding father, George Washington, I think I will always avoid party affiliation, regardless. Because when I look at the warning that he gave us, I think he's right. And, I'm conservative-minded. I believe in smaller government. I believe in right to life and protecting rights like right to bear arms. I believe in all of that stuff. I'm conservative. But I just know how to get it all done without the corruption that's going on in there. And I don't need an R behind my name. The people know the kind of man I am. I mean, they've seen me fighting in courts. They've seen me fighting down in the General Assembly. And the people that have been following my work for several years now, they know I'm a warrior for the people and for the Constitution. And it doesn't matter what letter's behind my name. But thank you for the question, sir. Anybody else? We're probably about done here. I'm about done.
Thank you, John.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you.